Good morning, video conference. Hello, everyone. Hello.
They're waving.
I just want to check in with video conference today. If everyone's there, to make sure that you have your mics on mute when we begin, and you'll be given you'll be able to ask questions during the session when we have breaks. Denise will have some questions for the audience, and we can get some feedback on typing.
Perfect.
Yeah. And everyone on the webinar, you'll be able to answer or ask questions too on the chat, and we can answer your questions when we take breaks to do that. There'll also be some time at the end for questions and answer period. Would I be able to check with video conference the nations who are there represented and how many people are in each room?
Houston, we have NADAP and health coordinator, 2 people.
Okay, thank you. Any other video conference that can tell me who's in the room and introduce yourself?
Tahalsic Health Center. I'm Jasmine White. I'm the telehealth coordinator.
Thanks, Jasmine, for joining. I see Kispiox there too. Is somebody in the room? McLeod Lake, is there somebody in the room? Akisnook, is there somebody in the room? Akiskinuk. Okay, I'll begin. So my name is Lena Minifi, and I'm Gispidwada. I'm from the House of Witali, from Gehahla, which is Kikatla, which is Tsimshian territory near Haida Gwaii. I'm the new facilitator here. This is my 3rd time, so everyone could take it a little easy on me, but I'm learning the ropes. And I'm really happy to be facilitating with Denise today, who's going to be our host. And the topic today is the roots of bullying. Denise Findlay is Squamish and lives in West Vancouver. She's the owner of Kwai Kwai Consulting, which is a consulting company that builds more connected communities. Denise is a facilitator, coach, and consultant, has been doing this for 13 years now. And the majority of work is based in First Nations communities. And I'm going to pass it over to her to let her begin. Thank you, Denise.
Good morning, everybody. Good to be back. I'm assuming some of the folks that were on the lateral violence session last month are back. But I will share a few little details about myself. I do belong to the Squamish Nation, and I do live on reserve in West Vancouver, where I'm raising my family, on top of my own private practice, where I travel around to different communities throughout Canada, facilitating either community workshops or working with leadership teams where there's been some conflict and helping people communicate better and get along better. I also work with the families of the Squamish Nation, providing support to our parents and foster parents, and training the social workers and the staff in regards to attachment and how to help our parents return to a more instinctive form, natural way of parenting children in a traditional context as well. So that's a huge honor, and it's been a huge learning curve for me, and it's influenced everything that I'm doing in terms of my work. This particular piece that I'll be sharing today is from Dr. Gordon Neufeld's theory and his work, and I am studying with the Neufeld Institute. I'm in advanced studies there, so I've been learning to facilitate a variety of different workshops designed by Dr. Neufeld, this being one of them. And so for those of you that are familiar with me, I have been facilitating lateral violence workshops for quite a long time, and I've evolved the workshop over the years, and this was just another piece of the puzzle for me that helped clarify and differentiate some of the behaviors and being able to tease apart what's the difference between aggression and frustration, and bullying, for instance, because I think we collapse those together. So this will be, it will certainly complement what I talked about last month, but it also will differentiate a person who's dealing with an aggression problem versus a bully, and how we get to that place. So I'm very happy to be here. This is a complex subject, and as I went over the presentation last night, I was really mindful of what are the pieces I need to pull out today to make sense of a complex issue. That is a really, really hot topic, considering the amount of bullying going on, not only in our schools, but in organizations. And pretty much everywhere you look, you see bullies. So hopefully I do a good job of that. I will try to go slow and leave room for questions as much as I can. And so if there is something and you want to type it in, then we can...
Yeah, we can address your questions. And it's really helpful if you can put in your name and then also the nation or the organization that you're coming from, so I could read that out in the questions as well.
Sorry, just to interrupt, I just want to have a look at this microphone for a moment, because apparently there's some audio issues on the webcam.
Okay, apparently we're having a break for audio checking.
Okay.
I want to correct those before
We want to make sure people can hear us, right?
Yeah, and we also want to ask the audience some questions too at some point. If there's points in your session that you want to ask, what their experiences are or what they think the answers are.
I will
that would
do
be
that.
Great to
Yeah,
engage
absolutely.
Too.
I do tend to put questions out there here and there. Absolutely. And if there's something that comes to your mind, please stop me and just, put it out there.
Okay. So thank you everyone for being patient for the audio. And is there anything else you can tell us about this work that you've done in the facilitation and like how it seems like you've you said you accumulated this information over time, like how long has it been that you've been actually working on?
Yeah, well, I started with this piece at least 7 years ago. The original name of the workshop under my own company was called The Crab in the Bucket, and it has evolved so much since then. And like anything, when you start, you're kind of idealistic. And I think I was idealistic going into it, and I learned the hard way. I took lots of bumps and bruises along the way, and learned my lessons in the trenches, so to speak.
I don't think there's any other way to learn sometimes.
The teachings you can't get from the classroom, the communities gave me, and my own professional development, my passion and interest in human development and psychology, and then certainly my exposure to the Neufeld Institute and Dr. Gordon Neufeld's work, which I was ironically led to because my son had been diagnosed with a invisible disability, and it was quite an alarming and painful experience for me. And what I noticed is that in my parenting, the more experts I invited into the more pediatricians and experts I invited into my son's life, the more disempowered I felt as a parent. And so I hadn't even heard of Dr. Neufeld before that time, and was led to his body of work looking for answers on how to be the best parent for my son. And I fell in love with the work. It made sense to me. It completely transformed my parenting. It completely transformed my relationship with myself, with my husband. And it is the paradigm that I'm using to work with the families in the Squamish Nation and in some of the other parenting work I do with other communities. And it just makes sense to people. It's an intuitive, natural way of looking at some of the challenges. And I have been honored to be chosen to be in advanced studies at the Neufeld Institute, where I do have an advisor who's a clinical psychologist that I'm able to work with as she helps support me in learning how to deliver this material. So I'm looking at everything in a cultural context, a traditional context, but I really am a messenger of this paradigm or theory that belongs to Dr. Neufeld, and it just seems to be a good fit. So.
And do you recommend people taking notes today, because we're not able to share the PowerPoint? Is that correct?
Yes, please do take notes. I am not sure at this point if I'm able to share the PowerPoint. I need to check, because some things will be copyrighted, and I I neglected to check, and I should have. So I just, for
But
my
just
own.
for safety,
Yes.
people, if you want to take down notes,
Absolutely.
then we should,
Yeah.
just let them know to take down as much notes as you can.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to try one more thing.
Turn down the volume of the microphone a little bit.
Everyone here okay now?
When it's up, they hear the motor sound. That's why she moved it down.
Okay.
Yeah, but then if I do it this way,
Better?
if we just do it directional low as possible.
I'm just going to grab a Kleenex for my.
We
Alright,
can hear
so
you here
everyone-
just fine.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Great.
Okay.
Don't
so
want a runny nose while I'm doing this here.
we will begin now.
All right,
Thanks
good.
everyone for your help and patience.
Thank you, thank you. I do want to add one more thing, and this is something that my Auntie Jackie, who is a dear friend of mine, a relative, and a respected teacher, and she always said, she reminds me who I work for. So she says, even though you report to that person over there, you remember you work for the ancestors. And that's when I start to get into my head and into the complexities of everything, and I start to get stressed out and affected by some of the politics and some of the mucky stuff, that just pulls me right out of it. And I remember, take my guidance from there, and all will be well. And I feel like since I've started doing this piece of work, they've approved, because it's just gone so smoothly. All right.
Okay.
We're ready to go?
Yeah. We're
Okay.
ready to put up the PowerPoint now.
Good. So we can go to the next slide.
The next thing.
Perfect.
Okay.
So the Neufeld course is actually called The Making and the Unmaking of the Bully. We called this session The Roots of Bullying, because that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to get to the roots of it. And truthfully, there have always been bullies historically, and bullies can be found in all contexts and all walks of life. So they're not just on the playground at school. We find them teaching in the schools, leading schools. We find them in organizations. We find them in communities. I love Gordon's approach to making sense of the bully, because we are trying to unravel the dark side of human nature and looking at it in terms of instincts that have sort of gone awry in a person, as opposed to behavior management or looking at the symptoms, because the bully's quite an enigma, like a mystery to people. It's hard for us to make sense of it when things happen. When we think of some of the young people we've lost because of bullying, and now with social media and whatnot, we all just shake our heads. We cannot make any sense of it. I don't know if many people had heard last year about there on a reserve in Saskatchewan, there was an older boy that he actually killed a younger boy on the reserve. A 10-year-old boy had killed I think he was maybe 5 or something like this. There wasn't a lot of information in the media, which I was really shocked by. But when I saw the article, I was horrified, and again shaking my head and saying, like, what can make a child do this to another child? But this information has certainly helped me make sense of it and unravel it. It is the course itself is a 1 to 2 day course, and it is thick with information, and so there's no way I can give it all today, so I'm going to endeavor just to give what I think is relevant. Any questions or no? Okay, good. Whoops, sorry. Bear with me as I figure out this technology as well. How do I get down to the notes part to scroll down? It's not working.
Oh,
You know what, that's okay. That's okay.
How do we get
Let's
to
move
the-
to the next slide. I'm
yeah.
okay.
No, this yesterday happened
Okay.
as well. Where we have
I just want to I have some little notes there just to jog my memory. So
He thinks there's 2 displays up, and that's why. So it just takes a second for the mouse to come up,
I see.
and then you can just move it down.
Okay.
Pull and scroll.
thank you so
Fantastic. That's the other thing that I wanted to mention that I think is really, really interesting, that we tend to see more bullies. They seem to be more prevalent in higher places. So I think that it's interesting that the bully gravitates to positions of authority. But once you understand the bully dynamic, you understand why that would be so, and how actually the characteristics of the bully are often they're stemming from almost a leadership quality that's gone awry or something. Now, I talked about this last month as well, and I think it's what I'm offering here is an attachment-based explanation that is Dr. Neufeld's explanation for bullying. Now, I will say this, that there's been a lot of research on bullying programs, and the research basically has uncovered that about 15% of the programs out there make the problem worse, which is kind of scary. And the other, I think 30 or 40% are doing nothing whatsoever. And so the approach to bullying, I mean, and I know I have a little boy in grade 1, and so my journey in the schoolyard is just starting, but it's certainly, it doesn't look like it's getting any better to me. Pink Shirt Day and all that sort of thing is not, it's not changing the character of kids who are bullying each other. So I wanted to address what it is not the result of, and again, I said this last month, it's not to do with power imbalance, because the truth is that there's lots of people in positions of power that are very benevolent and kind, and I think about people like Nelson Mandela, the Dalai Lama, and so it doesn't stand up that if you're in power, then you're going to be a bully, because there's many folks that are in power that aren't bullies.
And we have lots of examples in our communities too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But often you'll hear people say, well, it's about power and control, or this power imbalance. And you know, there's always going to be people who have more power than other people. That's just the hierarchical nature of life. And it also would assume that power is the preeminent need, and there have been theorists in history that believe that to be true. But when I talk about what the preeminent need actually is in a little bit, I'll address that. There's other ideas that it's a learned behavior, and the truth of the matter is you cannot teach somebody to be caring. This is the caveat, though. We can teach someone to act as if they care. That's different.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so we can teach someone to say sorry at the right times. Often the bully will sit in the room and say all the right things, and as Gordon would say, they behave much better, or they know much better than they behave. And so in the right places, people know what to say, but then behind closed doors, the behavior carries on. And so we can't teach someone to be caring and loving. This is instinctive. We're born as vulnerable beings with those vulnerable emotions, caring emotions, but things happen along the way where those get filtered out, which I'll talk about. There's some other ideas that it's a lack of empathy and a lack of oxytocin. Are the brains not creating oxytocin? Again, we can't teach empathy, although there are all sorts of programs out there that attempt to do this. We're often just teaching kids or people to act the right way, not changing their character. So it's not that it's a lack of something that the brain's producing. We're not taking into consideration wounding that happens and the filters that come into the brain that filter out the vulnerable emotions. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll talk more about it as we go.
So it's behavior versus ownership of the actual change.
Yeah, so I mean,
behavior modification.
Yeah, so we might change the behavior, right? We might change the behavior in the right context, but what's going on in the inside of the person or the inside of the child, because we all know people that can say they're sorry, or that they say they regret doing something, or they say they feel bad about something, but then carry on doing the same, repeating the same patterns when they're outside of that particular context, right? And then there's other ideas, and a lot of people who work with youth will hear that it's entitlement, they're spoiled brats, they're used to getting their own way. I've heard lots of this. And again, it doesn't stand up, because there's lots of people who are entitled, who have lots of privileges, who aren't bullies and who aren't mean people. So it doesn't apply consistently across the board. So what I'm going to introduce is Dr. Neufeld's thesis or theory on bullying. And I will say this much, that I know my teacher, my instructor for this particular course, Eva, she lives back east in Quebec, but I believe in Montreal, and she's been chosen as Global's bullying expert. And she does a ton of work in this area. She's all over in the school system. It's what tends to happen is schools pour a couple $100,000 into bullying programs, and a couple years in they realize it doesn't work, and then they'll come to this model. And this is what seems to be happening. And this model, it's not an expensive model. It's a relational based model, and it's just a different way of looking at things. But I think people want a pretty package, like here's a package on how to address something, and that's not what this is. It's an insight approach, and so it's not in a pretty package, steps 1 through 10 or whatever like that. So what Gordon calls this, and he calls it the alpha askew thesis, and what that really means is that something is askew, that we all have these instincts, and alpha instincts are the instincts to care for one another, and we all know people that tend to be the helpers of the world, the caregivers of the world, the people in our families that are the leaders, just the natural leaders, not the contrived leaders, but the ones who everybody gravitates to them. And I tend to be that person in my family. And so there's a certain kind of a dominance I have. I tend to be a guilt magnet. I feel responsible for everything. I just want to check.
Over-nurtured.
Well, I just feel responsible. Mm-hmm. And that is actually not a bad thing. That is an important quality to have. We need people like this. We need people who are leaders like this, who are heads of families like this. These are the caretakers of the world. They're the helpers of the world. And so I want to ask, who can identify with this dynamic of being an alpha, of being the helper, feeling responsible?
The nurturer, the provider.
That's right, yeah.
Is there anyone on webinar who wants to confess? Video
It's
conference?
not a bad confession.
I know I also take this place. And while you guys are talking, maybe you're commenting on webinar, ideas about responsibility. Our communities are based on responsibility. Yes. And there were positions that our matriarchs had
naturally and hierarchically.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So we still have these people in our communities and our families, and I notice it with the women in my family too. They're these natural nurturers, and they're the most responsible.
A lot of women, right?
Yeah.
In our communities. When I do a community workshop, many of the participants are women that show up to the circle that are wanting to create change. Not that we don't have good men leaders, but wanting to create that change and feeling very, very responsible. Now, the thing about being alpha is that it does come with the guilt.
Yeah.
So often we're guilt magnets.
Yeah, Sue Gladstone said you're not alone in this. So thank you for that.
Oh, good. I need a rest from it sometimes, though. We all do, right? We can get a little stuck there.
And self-care.
I put myself last all the time. Absolutely. And then I complain about it. But sometimes we can get stuck in the alpha position. Many of us get stuck there, and we can't shift into what Gordon calls the dependent mode to allow ourselves to be taken care of in many cases. So looking at this from how does the bully get created, there has to be this alpha instinct, this place of responsibility, and actually dominance in a way. We have to start there, and we have to understand that particular dynamic before we can understand how the bully's created.
Somebody's asking who Dr. Gordon is. Dr. Gordon
Neufeld.
And how do you spell his last name?
Neufeld. Dr. Gordon Neufeld.
And then we can put a link up later.
Yes, so you can look at the NeufeldInstitute.com. And he he's retired from his career, but he was a professor at UBC for about 20 some odd years, and then he went on to have a private practice, and he actually worked with the 30 most violent offenders in British Columbia, youth offenders. He was the psychologist, for instance, on the Renevert case. And he,
Wow.
yes.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so his career has spanned about 45 years, and he has dedicated his entire career to putting the pieces together in terms of developmental attachment theory.
Maybe we want to just explain what the Rena case was
Yes.
for people who weren't around.
Do you want to speak to it at all?
I know. I like.
Okay.
You
Yeah,
just give the summary.
it's been a long time now, and I don't know
in Victoria.
Yeah, it was the girl in Victoria that was bullied, and a group of kids that were her so-called friends that she was hanging out with, they murdered her.
Essentially, from beating her to death.
They did. So basically, what happened was one of the
In Victoria.
one of the alpha girls in the group, okay, one of the leaders of the group, the queen bee or whatever you want to call it. One of her, I guess Rena had some connection with her boyfriend, or there was something happening there, and so they wanted to teach her a lesson. And walking home from school, they actually tied her up and they burnt her hair. They wanted to ugly her, and then they beat her and watched her drown while they sat there calmly smoking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a sad
Tragic.
case. It was about 10 years ago in Victoria, BC, but
I don't know
it was
how
around
long.
then, 10
Yeah.
to 12 years. So.
I know. So that's a actually really good example, and Gordon will say how those kids were marooned. They had no contact with any adults. They were absolutely marooned with each other, and that's part of the problem. Is there's no connection to like an alpha that's outside of that peer group when it comes to children. And actually, even when we're looking at organizations with adults who are bullying, the solution is not to try and have the bully work it out with the victim. It's often to have the bully be paired up with alpha mentor in the organization.
Who's functional.
That's
and
right,
you
to
can-
take them under their wing.
Yeah.
Yeah, not to try and I'll pause there because I'll talk more about how that doesn't work and how that gets us into more trouble. So anyways, yeah, he's a brilliant man, and he does travel all over the world lecturing, and he is a rock star in Europe, funnily enough, because they look at things differently there. We have adopted the mainstream models are more medical and behavioral, and so there's, as Gabor Maté would say, because Gabor Maté and Gordon co-authored the book Hold On to Your Kids, and Gabor Maté will say there's a lot of bias in North America against this kind of understanding and insight. So I always show this slide. I love it because to me, it reminds me of a time when we were living relationally, we weren't role-based, and we worked to live, not for money, and the priorities were different. Everything was set up in our villages for dependence and caregiving and caretaking, and there was a hierarchy in place, and the priority was survival and taking care of each other, and so everything revolved around this. Whereas now, we go our separate ways to earn money during the day, and then we go back to our homes and we send our kids to strangers, and it's just a different way of life, which in some ways has been lost, but the preeminent need remains the same, and there is consensus now. Neuroscience and neurobiology, we can take pictures of the brain and we can see what's happening there, and it verifies that indeed attachment and connection still remain the preeminent need above all others. So it's not power, it's not money, it's not all the drives and pursuits that we have in modern society. Our need for contact and closeness is still the driving force. It's what drives us, and it's what we need more than anything to thrive and grow together. And I think sometimes we forget this, and I know that in our communities there's a lot of fragmentation. There's been so much wounding.
Yeah, it's been interrupted, obviously,
Yes.
through colonization, and really, it's not that long ago, though. I have to say that, as opposed to people who've been the colonizers or the settlers that have come, some of our communities had kinship and responsibilities up to not very, even 80, 70 years ago. We're still really following these ways of reliance and dependence and nurturing and connection, so.
Well, and there are still, you can still see this, and I know that some of the cultural teachings, and I, for instance, what I understand the teachings that have been shared with me in terms of longhouse life, there's a natural hierarchy that takes place, and there's a natural way that people are brought into that system, and how kids are involved, and responsibilities given, and how people are taken care of. And you can still see some of this happening in some of the families, but there has been such a significant amount of wounding. And you know what? When we have a baby, we basically go home and we take our baby home, and dad goes back to work, and or mom goes back to work now, and we're isolated at home, and we're missing these attachments.
Yeah. There's different roles.
Well, there is, and I heard Gordon say something really interesting, and I know it's true for my family. My mom passed away when I was 19 months or 16 months old, so I don't have that grandmother figure in our life. But my husband's mother, I heard Gordon say that even our grandparents and our parents are peer-oriented, which means that people would rather hang out with each other than the younger generations. So we've got peer-oriented culture where the kids just want to hang out with the kids, and the parents just want to hang out with other parents their age, and the grandparents would rather be off hanging out with elders their age, and we're lacking in that intergenerational connection. The hierarchy is missing, and we've got this flattening, and that's part of what's contributing to some of the difficulty.
Yeah, and the youth now especially, because these changes are just taking place so rapidly. Somebody was commenting on the webinar, Dee Dee, I don't know where you're from, but in 2012, 2013, Dee Dee says 35% of grade 10 and grade 12 Aboriginal students report being bullied, 3 times more than the mainstream rate.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, higher levels of frustration as well, and that's last month when I was here, I was talking about whenever you're working with a marginalized group of people, there's more frustration and the aggression levels are higher.
Yeah, well,
for those groups.
I would like to know more if this has an impact from being outside pressures and outside oppression and stuff too.
Another thing that just came to mind is there is another study out there that shows that youth today have about they report back 80% less empathy than they did 20 years ago.
Wow. That's incredible.
It's a loss of something that's really important.
And I really believe that, we're using technology now for something I believe that's really important, to share information to communities.
Yes.
But technology can also give you this lack of responsibility because you're behind this screen, this computer, this smartphone, saying these things you wouldn't say to people's faces because you'd have consequence right away. Yeah. And you'd be able to connect and see people's emotions and how you're doing damage or hurting them.
Yeah.
That being behind these things is I think more prevalent for bullying in these mechanisms too, this technology.
It's certainly an outlet, and the other case that reminds me of is, it was Amanda Todd, right?
Oh,
she was bullied over Facebook and
the internet and everything, emails.
Yes.
Even to her house, I think they got her.
Yes. There are again, this is from out of Gordon's mouth, there are no cultural scripts for technology. So the technology allows people to stay superficially connected 24/7. Our kids don't have a break from each other.
But also no consequence for
there's no moral conscience on the internet. Anything goes. There are no rules. There's no cultural norms. It's a free for all, and it can be used in anything goes. There's no accountability or responsibility.
Yeah. Which I think I think maybe our traditions can kind of interweave with it, and putting in respect into these tools again, and making sure they're used properly.
Well, I think that from what I understand and what makes sense to me and what I see working is when our youth are taken back into relationship with a responsible, caring, loving adult, and that they're connected in this way, and that this is how tradition and culture is passed on. Peers can't teach each other that, and if they're just learning from each other, and they're learning language from each other, and they're learning from peer culture or pop culture, that's what's influencing them.
On behavior.
Not elders and not mums and dads and aunts and uncles and grandparents. There's such a huge disconnect there.
So I have a question about the empathy statistics you just gave about the 80%.
Yes.
Is there a place that we can get that link and that resource afterwards?
Yes, I will. If I quote, and if you could just track some of those things that I quote, then I will come back with where you can find it.
And we'll put these links back up on the UBCLC learning site as well under Roots of Bullying, and then I can also email all these links and resources out.
That'd be great.
To the people who registered as well.
Good.
So.
Thank you. All right. So know that, we're all creatures of attachment. It is the most powerful. Our relationships as we grow are the most powerful force in developing our personality and behavior. We learn from those that we're attached to. We develop in the context of our attachments. We also get stuck in our development in the context of those attachments if there's wounding and if the needs aren't being met. And attachment is governed by emotion and instinct, which is the limbic system in the brain, which needs to be the conditions need to be right for the limbic system to stay healthy and do its job of growing us up. And we need to have access to all the vulnerable emotions to maintain a soft heart and to develop fully into responsible, mature beings. I love this quote by Margaret Wheatley, and I often think that in terms of relationship, the whole universe is set up in a hierarchical fashion. If you look at plant life, if you look at the animal world, if you look at the universe and the solar system, there is an organizing nature to systems, and there is a hierarchy in place. And we have moved to this sort of egalitarian way of life where it's like everyone's equal, but that's actually not true. We are meant to relate in a dependent, and I'll talk about this a little bit more as we go, in a dependent, there should be a dependent seeker mode, and then there should be that alpha provider mode, and we should be able to do a little dance this way. And this is how it's been set up to facilitate caregiving, caretaking, dependence, living together in that attachment village where we are taking care of each other. And so I just love that quote. Now I can see that my list here, is there somehow on my computer, I had a list of words overlaying this photo and now we can't see the words. Is there some way that we can fix it?
Can we try to go to the next one to see if it pops up? Can you try going to the next slide to see if it's a separate layer?
No, because I can see the next slide right here,
Okay.
but we need to be able to. How can I do this? Help. No?
I just think
do?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll have to. I've got a picture of twins there, and if you could see the words that should be overlaying this, I would have the provider instincts and the seeker instincts, the alpha instincts and the dependent instincts to show the way that we're intended to come into relationship. And for anyone out there who has twins or has seen twins, what you'll notice about them is even though they're identical twins, one will always take the more dominant role. They will not be equal in that relationship. I have identical triplet cousins who are 40 now, and they are never equal. Ever. There's always one that is the more dominant one, and then the other two, and there's a little bit of shifting with the two younger ones, like they're minutes apart, but the oldest one is the dominant alpha always. And so when we come together, we are meant to come together in one comes as the seeker, and so that seeker, if I come to somebody in need of something, it should activate the provider or the alpha instincts in that person. So you should be moved to provide something somehow, to provide care, whatever it is that the need is, and vice versa. A good alpha will evoke the seeker dependent instincts in another. Does that make sense? It's hard without the words up here, right? A good alpha, and you'll know when you meet an alpha, you might be the most dominant person. You might be the person who's used to being alpha, but there's certain people that I run into that are more alpha than me, and I just go into that dependent mode and I can feel my myself go there. And I noticed that, like, even in my relationship with Dr. Neufeld, if I'm around him, I go into this seeker-dependent mode because he's so very alpha. And then there's other people that evoke this lovely sort of protector instinct in me where I want to provide care for. I'm very mindful of the needs of other. And so part of being alpha is that we are sensitized to the needs of other people, the vulnerabilities, and that means that if we feel like someone is afraid or hurt or scared or in need of something, that we would be moved to provide somehow to help that person, to care for that person. Now, on the other hand, the seeker mode, when you come into contact with a strong alpha, it should evoke your dependent instincts. Now, we all know what happens if you have two people who are alpha and they don't do this dance. If there's not a dance that happens. Tell me, what happens when you have two dominant alphas come together and there's no provider in the equation? Let's hear from people.
Does anybody on video conference want to take a stab at this?
If we don't do this dance, because we're meant to do a dance, right? We're meant to shift in and out, contextually, depending on who we're with, what's going on. What happens if you have a child who...
Rebecca says.
Oh, great.
Clash. Violence? Question mark.
Good. My husband and I are both very alpha. We're both firstborn children. We both come from families where there were addictions. And so we both tend to be very strong alpha dominant. And so we do get a lot of this. And I'm getting better, and so is he, at learning how to do that little dance with each other. The same is true if you have two people who are needy all the time and no one can provide. What happens when you have two people that come together that are always looking to have their needs met and no one's rising to meet the other's needs?
Nothing gets done. No, I'm just kidding.
What happens what happens when that happens?
Well, Michelle Eng from your channel, Tribal Council, says each alpha person gets convinced that they're better.
I think that's counter well.
Amending Violence says they fight verbally or feel threatened. Dee Dee says they walk away. Amending Violence says the two needy people feel both helpless in the situation.
Absolutely. And it's so frustrating because when you're in that needy mode, when you're in the seeker role, sometimes we need to be like, if I travel a lot and I come home exhausted and I've been facilitating and I've been very alpha to do all that, and I have to be alpha to do that. I have to be providing answers and being strong, and even when I'm feeling a little shaky on the inside, presenting as if I'm the answer. I go home, there is not an ounce of alpha left in me when I get home. I fall through the door and I just want to be taken care of. And now if my husband responds and says, oh, it was so hard looking after the kids all week. And then it's just like, oh, forget it. No one's needs are getting met. And it's incredibly frustrating. We can laugh. It's comical right now.
But it's so true.
So it's a dance that we do, and know that we have both alpha. We have both alpha instincts, those instincts to provide, as well as the seeker instincts and the dependent instincts in us. And for a relationship to work, we must be able to do that dance of relationship. Now, tell me, what happens when you have a child who's the alpha and a parent who's the dependent?
And I have to admit that was my situation growing up in my family.
Yes.
Yeah.
Me too.
And we have multiple generations of this because of children that were taken away from parents, that got teaching of maternal and paternal roles got interrupted through residential school.
Yes.
And it's really, really difficult to know what to do and how to raise, and sometimes the kids end up taking over,
It's quite instinctive, and I think that if we can get our heads wrapped around this, that it's not a choice, a conscious choice on the part of the child. The child's brain shifts gears and says, in order for me to feel safe, in order for me to be taken care of, I can't depend on mom, dad, teacher. You don't even have to be, I'm going to just say, you don't even have to be a really lousy parent for this to happen. You can actually be a dismissive parent in terms of not taking care of the emotional needs and not being attuned to your child. You can very easily get a child. And if you have a child like mine who's highly sensitive, he will lean towards dominance because he's so very sensitive. And so you can get this alpha child, and you have this child orchestrating the whole family. You have the child orchestrating the parent. Now, that is out of whack. That's not how nature intended things to be. The grandparent, the parents, the aunts, the uncles, the teachers, they need to be in the provider role where children are concerned, and the children need to be in the dependent mode. But if the brain cannot relax, if the brain cannot come down, bring those defenses down, we can't shift that. And so this starts to give you an idea of how we get to how the bully is born. Okay, those alpha instincts get stuck in a child. That first of all, they have to have that tendency towards dominance, and then they get quite stuck there.
And so, just some more comments. Yeah. Rebecca was saying that the vulnerability is reinforced with the two betas coming together, I guess, or are you calling the two needy individuals. And then no mutual satisfaction amongst all parties, and it would be challenging for the parent to cope. Michelle,
yes. Now, I'm not sure if what the first part was. The vulnerability gets reinforced.
If there's two needy people coming together, that helpless, that vulnerability.
Well, put it this way: if we are vulnerable and needy, but no one is meeting, the brain will put defensive mechanisms up, and this is where, and then I turn into alpha, and I'll tell you, when I go to alpha, but I'm lost my caring heart. Alpha who loses their caring, and those of you out there, you don't have to admit this, but I know you know who you are. If you're strong alpha and you're tired, your needs aren't being met, and you're at the end of your rope and you lose the caring and the heart hardens up, it's scary. Because that dominance just takes over. And so you can start to get an idea of where this bully instinct happens. Yeah. So this is the alpha complex described. And so if you can see yourself or your child or other folks in there, then you have this. And I'm admittedly, I have the alpha complex. But I'm I soften it and I temper it and I work with it. As long as I have my caring heart, it's okay. As long as I can still instill confidence in the people I work with, that they feel safe with me, that I use, like the bossy, controlling, demanding, seeks to be on top, take front stage, compelled to take over, take charge, can be driven to show superiority. This sounds so bad, doesn't it? Has difficulty taking directions or asking for help, driven to trump interactions and have the last word. Must be in the know, can act as a know-it-all. Now, I have the alpha complex. I do. And I use it in my role. It works very well for me in my role. When I'm facilitating and I'm in front and I'm in charge and I have to stand in front of 100 people or something like that, I need all that.
But also life determines that all of us know how to do this at some points in our life.
It's in us.
Yeah.
Some people have a harder time. The instinct doesn't always come out as strongly in some people as it does in others. Other people get stuck in dependent mode.
But if we need to protect our children or protecting our household or
huge,
we need to, this is a tool that you can use and use it in a
hugely
way.
Yes, so. You got it.
And you look at animals and you always you notice these different roles too when you see them together in packs.
I always say the mama bear.
Yeah.
Right? What does the mama bear do? And I'll say to my kids, what does mama bear do when her baby cubs aren't listening and growls at them, or just to give them that visual. And sometimes we need that mama bear energy or that papa bear energy to have people follow us, to instill confidence. Now,
there's a question right here, and I think he's waiting for the golden nuggets. Stephen R. So is bully developed when a child's needs are unmet in their first years of life because they've become too selfish in order to meet their own needs? Trust versus mistrust. So he's trying to. Right. I think you're trying to. Okay. She's going to be dealing with this.
Well, I think you're getting there, and I'm glad you said that because I want to pull you back on one point there. That this is not instrumental behavior or volitional. The child is not doing this to make something work. The brain does this because of what hasn't worked in the child's life. Okay? We often look at kids and look at people and say they're doing that to get somewhere. They're doing that on purpose to make something work. And in actual fact, we have to look at the antecedents. We have to say, what happened to get this person or this child here? It's not to make something work, it's because something hasn't worked. And so if you get a child where there's been lots of wounding, and if you think about in the First Nations community, the intergenerational trauma, immense wounding, the abuses that people suffered, and that has trickled down intergenerationally in the parenting. Okay, that we still have parents that cannot consistently, and I want to be gentle and kind, because again, this is the work that needs to be done with families to help them heal, is that they just can't consistently show up to provide for their children's needs in some cases.
And there's just some needs that are impossible to provide at that time, no matter if they're doing their best or not. You know?
Yes, there's just challenges there that prevent, and I know parents that in their heart they want to do it, but they just can't consistently get it together. They can't hold it together for a long enough period of time to do this, and kids are still, they're being removed, and protection issues and all of this sort of thing. And so when you say, yeah, there is more bullying in First Nations communities and First Nations schools, well, yeah, there's been more wounding. There's been more fragmentation, and it's still happening today.
There's struggle for basic needs too.
Absolutely.
That parents work really hard for, like my own, worked really hard so I wouldn't be in poverty. But it's something that you're a low-paid worker that can't just make it, and you have 3 jobs. And
the stressors are more. There's more stressors. There's more things that don't work, and so we've got higher levels of frustration in some of our families, and so we have to take all that into consideration when we start to think about some of the complexity of some of the problems. And I feel honored in my work to work with parents and to try somehow to create an environment in which their defenses can come down and they can get their soft heart back, because it's not about teaching people how to parent their kids. As I always say this, it's not. Parenting is instinctive. Caring is instinctive. You look at the animals. You don't need to teach an animal to take care of its cub. And so you might have a parent that might have all sorts of challenges, a lack of resources, but if they have the love for their child and the child has the love for them, it'll be okay. It's when the hardening happens, okay, and the heart gets hard and the brain basically stops to develop, that we have a lot of the problems that we see in terms of the wounding. And so back to this slide, alpha is really important. We need to have alpha instincts. Some children can get stuck in alpha if their needs aren't met. And so I want to give you an example of how easy this can happen. I think I'm a pretty good parent. I'm not perfect. I make all kinds of mistakes, but I have a son who has some neurological damage, so he has invisible disability that renders him quite hypersensitive to everything. Almost like low end of the autism scale. And so because of his sensitivity, his brain is more likely to move into a defensive posture just to get him through the day. Going to school, just everything. And so the filters come into the brain so he doesn't have to feel everything. But what happens is we lose our vulnerable feelings when that happens. We lose access to those emotions required to be caring and responsible. We need those emotions. And so often he'll come home and he's got a little hard edge to him. And then it's my job to collect and soften. Now, what if a child doesn't have that? What if a child doesn't have a parent that's tuning in this way and providing for the child's needs and helping the child develop the internal resources in this way? Then what? The child gets stuck there. And day after day, my son would be a candidate for becoming a bully if I wasn't doing the work of keeping his heart soft. Make sense? Does it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I love this picture that I found because look at that, hey? We've got a little person taking care of a baby, and it's like the caring instincts are there. They are there, and you will see this if you take... the Roots of Empathy program is a wonderful program because what it does is it evokes the alpha instincts in little kids. Mm-hmm. Okay? It's not about teaching It's not about teaching empathy or caregiving. It's about evoking the instinct to care, preserving the instinct to care in the child. That's different work.
It's practice.
It's not even practice. It's just a preservation of something that is so instinctive in us.
Okay.
That could be lost if there's too much wounding. So the work is to preserve what the child is born with. And with the Roots of Empathy program, you're evoking it. And if you take a toddler or a preschooler and you put a little baby in that child's arms, what happens? You bring home little baby sister, little baby brother, and you say to the 3-year-old or the 4-year-old, you're the big brother or the big sister, and you let that little preschooler hold the infant. What happens? What do you see in the preschooler? I want to see what people say.
Anybody on webinar and video conference want to let us know what happens when you see a toddler with a baby?
A preschooler, toddler preschooler hold
a child.
What do you see in them?
It becomes mine.
Yeah, it evokes those instincts, the alpha instincts. Yes. And now all of a sudden you see them puff right up, right? Those are instincts. This can't be taught. This is where we're going wrong with this. We're thinking, let's take kids who are defended and they've lost their caring heart, and now let's teach them to care. It's more about melting. Preserving if you can, but then melting the ones who've become hardened to get the instinct back. It's funny because when my little guy, when I brought my second child home, I have a picture of my son. He was 4, sitting on the couch with his arms like this. He still had a soother, and he was looking down at the baby. I couldn't. It didn't happen as quickly. I had to work on evoking the instinct in him. It wasn't just automatic like that, right? I had to work with this. But they're there in all of us, and that's very hopeful as far as I'm concerned.
So there's a question about, I guess, nurture versus nature here. Michelle Ang from Newtown North Tribal Council says, are we born with empathy? And Diane says, is this a learned behavior from parents?
No, we're born with the instinct to care. But we can lose the instinct if the conditions are not conducive to a soft heart.
And also asks Michelle, at what point in life, when preserving empathy, doesn't work, or I guess at what point in life? I'm not too sure about that question, but
yeah, from what I understand, your heart can harden at any time, and it can be softened at any time. And I will always go to the example of my grandfather. I shared this last time. I think he died last May, almost a year ago, 94. He'd had a very, very difficult life. He was a very strong man, a very dominant man, but he did not have a soft heart. But when he was in the hospital and he knew he was dying, his heart melted, and he got his tears back, and he got his caring heart back, and he was able to make the connections with his family members as he said goodbye to everybody. Now that's at 94. And so part of what I love about Dr. Neufeld's approach is that it gives hope back. It says, like, this is human nature to care. And if the conditions are right and the heart melts, I mean, we all know people that have been cold, callous sort of people, and then the right person comes into their life and melts their heart, and it changes everything. It wasn't an expert who did it. It was just another human being. It also accounts for cross-species attachment, where you'll have the natural predator adopt a different species, a younger, and caregive that. Again, those same instincts allow for that to happen and facilitate that process. So I think the biggest shift I'm hoping for people to make is that away from this idea that it needs to be taught to, these are instincts we have inherently within us that we're born with, that all mammals are born with. The instinct to care for, provide for, depend on each other, and that if there's been lots of wounding and the conditions haven't been right, we don't lose them, but filters come into the brain that we lose the vulnerable, caring feelings that go along with the dominance. Does that make sense? Sometimes after I talk, I have to ask that because I feel like listening to myself, and I'm saying so many words sometimes.
Michelle says, thank you for your story. It makes sense.
Good. So to fulfill our provider role, we must be able to be moved to assert that dominance, to assume responsibility, and to care for and care about. Those are the three things, the three instincts required for caregiving. Really important. And so, actually, I'll just clarify. So dominance is to take the lead, to take control, to give orders, to demand deference, to command attention, to get on top of things, to be in the know, to provide answers, to trump interactions, and to have the last word. Responsibility, oopsie, forgive me, folks.
It's okay.
How do I do this again?
The slides just...
There we go. I figured it out. That's exciting. To assume responsibility is to make things work for, to feel guilty when things don't work, to feel badly when something doesn't work, to fix things for, to make things better for, to feel remorse, concerning, or to make sacrifices for. You start to see how these are important. These are so important. To care for and care about, to be concerned about, to help, to bear the burdens of, to give assistance to meet the needs of, and to provide what is needed. In order to serve the role of provider, we are highly sensitized to signs of vulnerability and challenges to our alpha position. That is part of being a good alpha, is we are just sensitized. We feel when someone's in need, and we are moved to care for, but we are also sensitized to any threat to that. So that would be a challenge to our dominance. And anyone out there who's highly alpha knows that you pick up right away when there's a challenge to your alpha position. Is it just me? Tell me it's not.
No, it's not just me.
Oh, good. It's like I manage it sometimes like, a little alpha challenge there. I get it. All right.
So they want one more time for the three things.
Want me to go back?
Just one more time.
Yeah.
Assert dominance, assume responsibility, care for, and care about.
We must be moved to assert dominance, assume responsibility, and care for and care about.
Okay.
Really important. If you think about any parent, any leader, any person that's in a position of caring for other people, that's the recipe right there. And it can't be taught. It is instinctive.
And if we can, somebody just wants you to read out that.
I know. I'm sorry, but I don't know
That's
why
all
my
right.
pictures have all popped on top of the text here. I had that
Sometimes it's
behind.
different PowerPoint.
To fulfill the role of provider, we must be able to move to assert dominance, assume responsibility, care for, and care about.
Okay.
Now, we humans are easily wounded. We are born incredibly vulnerable. And if the vulnerability is too much to bear, the brain and heart harden, numbing out the more vulnerable feelings. This is survival. This is also instinctive and mechanical. We do not tell the brain to do this. The brain does it for us. And with a child, the brain will say, I need to do what I deem necessary to keep this child safe. This child needs to be able to live in and tolerate a highly wounding environment. So I'm going to numb out this kid so this kid can survive this. Now, if you think about residential school, I would say that most of the people that survived had that experience, that for survival purposes, the brain just did what it needed to do to get the child through. And I know for my own childhood, there were things that I had to survive. When I look back, I think, how did I manage to survive it? And yet I did. And I can almost remember those times where my brain just almost like just numbed me out, or sometimes even put me to sleep. I remember when I would just fall asleep under the most circumstances one shouldn't be able to fall asleep in. But just to numb myself, that's what would happen. And it was my brain doing the job for me. There's nothing wrong with the brains of anyone that is having this happen. But often you'll see a lot of behaviors that get diagnosed, and this particular dynamic, which is called defensive detachment, is at the root of it. I've worked with families, and I've heard Dr. Neufeld tell many, many stories about when he got to the heart of this and he started to melt the person, that a lot, especially children with cascading diagnoses and things, oppositional defiant disorder, an aggression problem, ADHD, you name it, that the diagnosis would disappear as the heart softened. So the emotions that no longer register now are feelings of caring and feelings of responsibility. We actually lose these. And those are feelings required for an alpha to be able to be a provider and a caregiver. And what basically happens is that we lose two of the key things here, and all we're left with is we are now, the alpha is only moved to assert dominance.
That's it.
Yeah.
Wow.
The other two are too vulnerable to feel. They're gone. We're desensitized to those, and now our instinct moves us to assert dominance. And the way that that unfolds is as following. And we see this in kids and adults alike through fear and intimidation, put down, shaming and humiliation, exposing and embarrassing, and tricking and conning. And I've heard Dr. Neufeld talk about working in the prison, and he says the prison system's full of bullies on both sides of the bars.
Yeah.
And that the bully thinks that everyone thinks like this. They project their psychology out onto everybody, and they think everyone is like this, and they think if they can con and trick you, that you're stupid. Like if you're not doing that too, then there's something wrong with you, because this is what everyone does. This is how life is. So you start to see how the prevailing approach of trying to teach a bully to behave better, or sitting the bully with the victim, can be quite disastrous. I'll talk more about that as we go. So the bully instinct results from natural alpha instincts perverted by emotional defendedness. So we take the dominant, caring alpha, and we all know, if you think about, I've heard so many stories, and my Auntie Jackie is the oldest in her family, and she was the alpha, and so she took care of all of her siblings. Right? She was able to maintain a soft heart, thank goodness. But imagine if you take a person like this, or a teenager like this, with that strong alpha instinct, and now you take away the vulnerable emotions. What you get, it's scary, because they're just not moved to care or take any sort of responsibility anymore. So people display signs of vulnerability to get help. That's why we do it. When we are in need and we expose ourselves, and this is what happened with Amanda Todd, is she was seeking empathy from her peers.
Yeah.
She was reaching out to them, showing her underbelly, showing her vulnerability, saying help, help. And she was doing this with bullies.
Yeah, and men, the men who were also taking advantage of the situation with her.
Yes, and so the instinct would not have been to meet the need and to take care of. What would it have been? They would have been moved only to dominate and exploit the vulnerability at that point. And so that's what happens with a bully, is that now vulnerability in a person evokes the instinct to exploit it.
To humiliate, to embarrass,
That's right.
to dominate, as opposed to taking care of it.
Just,
That's incredible.
just as you and I would be moved to instinctively moved to, like, I wouldn't have to think twice. If you were hurt, I would just move into care for you. The bully is moved just as naturally to turn the knife at that moment. Okay? The other thing is the bully also is sensitized to any challenges. And don't ask me where this study comes from, but I have heard Gordon talk about it, that there is some research that shows what percentage of kids, they start in kindergarten, by around grade 2 or 3, I think, you'll see, instead of looking up like this, they're like this. So they have gaze aversion, because they know if they make eye contact, or if the bully perceives the eye contact as an alpha challenge, the bully will be asserted to reestablish the pecking order. And so the bully is so sensitized to this. They're like, they've got major radar, and they're just, they're seeking vulnerability, noticing where that is, and that evokes exploitation. And if there is someone else who comes in that's more dominant, then they're going to want to put that person in their place quite instinctively as well.
There's some people who are having some aha moments on here. I think you've brought them to an aha moment.
Well, you can thank Dr. Neufeld for that. I'm just the messenger. But thank you. I'm glad you're having those ahas. That's awesome. So for there to be alpha askew, there has to be two conditions. You have to have the alpha complex, first of all. Yeah. Okay, and then you have to be defended against caring and responsibility, and this is where the bully instinct is born. You have to have those two things. So you take a child or a person who's got an alpha complex, and then they become defended against caring and responsibility, and bingo bango, you've got a bully on your hands.
So it's really about having that hardened heart and
yes, and loss of those vulnerable feelings. And so now think about how we take the bully and we take the victim of the bullying, and we say, well, come sit down and now tell the bully how that made you feel and how that hurt your feelings. What are we doing?
You're just you're reinforcing the bully.
We're fueling the bully, because the bully will say sorry in the right context because they know much better than they behave. And then what are they going to do out on the playground? Now they are armed.
But they know they've made the child vulnerable. They've embarrassed, they've humiliated, they've affected them. So now they're like, oh, it was successful.
And now we're getting the child to show their underbelly even more, and which is going to fuel the bullying instinct. I know, right? And we even do this with adults. And I've learned my lesson this way. There was a time where I would say, take the person and the victim and put them together to work it out. And now I'll say, well, is this a bully problem? And if it is there any hope for softening with this person? And before you ever bring these two people together, the leader needs to work with the bully. Now, this is interesting. Again, you can Google this. I don't know where to find this one either, but there was a reserve in Africa where they had protected elephants. And for some reason, they culled out all the bull elephants. And the bull elephants are the dominant male elephants. And what happened was that the elephants all started to bully each other. And the park ranger instinctively said, I think we need to bring some bulls back. And they brought a couple of bulls back, and it stopped. And so the presence of a caring, dominant alpha leader, putting a hierarchy in place.
In every group.
Yes. And I mean, the way that our school system operates is ages and stages, so we group kids together of the same age. If you think back historically, in any early culture or village or traditional lifestyle, there weren't enough children to group together in ages and stages, and so there was always a hierarchy. There were always old, and if I look on my street on Reserve, there are kids of all different ages running around playing together. It's not all the 4-year-olds, all the 6-year-olds, all the 8. There's a hierarchy that's there, and that hierarchy is really important to facilitate the caregiving and the caretaking.
Wow. So there's reasons for like big brothers and big sisters.
Totally.
And when they put the middle school people with elementary and high school with middle school.
Yes. Yes. And so one of the things that my son's school has done, which is great, is they have big buddies in grade 7. And I love that. I think that that's a wonderful, I don't know if they know why it works, but it does. And it's great. And the older ones feel a caring towards the little ones. And you can, like the big boys will say, hey, Jake, when they're walking by to my little guy, and he's got his big buddy, right? So it's, again, the hierarchy.
So I have a very specific question, which is more of a medical question.
Yeah.
So Jerome asked, what you're describing at this moment sounds like sociopathy, which is a mental health issue, ? Where's the line between the bully and the sociopath drawn?
So this is like, and I'm not a doctor, so it's a different way of looking at this through the lens of attachment and defendedness. And when Gordon teaches Intensive 1 and Intensive 2, he talks about this ladder and the levels of defendedness. And so from what I understand, I mean, at the first stage of defendedness, what we see is we lose the ability to hear or see anything that would be wounding. And so we have a person that cannot stay out of harm's way and can't see trouble coming at that level of defendedness. Okay? So often the victim of bullying is also defended. Do you see? Because they're not moved to caution. A child with a healthy limbic system will be moved to caution. They'll know exactly where the bully in the playground is, and they'll run the other way, like I used to do that. The child who's been wounded and those filters are in place, they'll walk right into the bully repeatedly. They'll go into the bathroom when the bully's there. Okay? Now from there, what we see, that's called a perceptual defense, and then we move to an emotional defense, which is now we no longer feel the vulnerable emotions. So they're still there. They're still running through us, energy moving through us. That's what emotion is. And now we don't feel any of those emotions. From there, we move to a physiological defense, which is where you'll see a lot of anxiety problems, where now we can't see trouble coming. We can't stay out of harm's way. We're not feeling any of the emotions. The alarm that we feel is disconnected from the alarming event, and we have the experience physiologically in our body. So maybe we should be afraid in a situation, but instead of fear registering, we just feel anxious. And then from there, we go to a chemical defense, which is where the brain chemistry is altered, which is where you get these sort of nerves of steel. And from what I understand, psychopaths and brains, or like heart surgeons, they have the same chemistry, brain chemistry. They have nerves of steel, and so they only often will feel an adrenaline rush, if anything, from doing something, but there's no physiological response or anything. That's my understanding of it. And
so a child is capable of feeling emotion before this hardening, and they'd be able to be melted to go back to that.
Yes.
Whereas a sociopath and psychopath would not have that before, or the capability after if you try to do.
Well, that's not true, because I've heard Gordon talk about the sociopaths and psychopaths and murderers that he worked with, and that when the conditions were created for softening, and if he could get some tears out of them, that they would start to heal. And what he would see, or what they would report back, is all of a sudden they had an anxiety disorder, and they'd say, like, "Doc, like, why did you do this to me? I liked the way I was before. I felt nothing, and now I'm worrying about everything." And that's part of the healing process. So I'm not a clinical psychologist or a doctor, but I'm only repeating what I've heard Gordon speak about many times.
So there's been some cases that he's made.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think that this is part of what I love about what he's saying, is that we can never put a cap on anyone's potential, like the generalizations we use to describe people, because if you think about in the history of mankind, the miracles that have happened with people, circumstances shifting, and people healing, it's amazing. And there's a really good book by Viktor Frankl, and he was a doctor in the Jewish concentration camps, and it's called Man's Search for Meaning. It's a small book. Check it out, but it really, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And he was, I believe he was a psychologist.
Viktor Frankl.
And he survived the Jewish concentration camps, and he watched people, and he watched what gave people the will to live versus the people who gave up and died. It's a great book. So I want to just give you this little snapshot of what's called a 78-year-old bully. And you know what? When I read this snapshot, I cried when I read it. But it just gives you an example of how bullying can creep in anywhere. If in this particular situation, this lady was, this is just a picture of a random lady, but there was this elderly lady living in a nursing home, and she was the roommate of another elderly lady. And the other lady, the friend's lady's husband, had been out playing cards. Now, this woman was senile, and her husband had passed away, but she always forgot that he was gone. And so she'd always be asking people where he was, and people would have to, help her. And if you've ever met it and known anyone like this, it's almost like they grieve repeatedly the loss of their loved one. It's awful. And so in this particular case, the friend's husband had come back from playing cards, And this lady said, "Have you seen my husband?" And this elderly man said, "Yes, I was just playing cards with him." And he took great delight in seeing her confusion and her bewilderment. That is bullying, okay? It's also bullying when you see a husband or a person being sarcastic and making fun of someone in public, taking shots at people in this way. Anyone who is moved to exploit vulnerability in a person, even this much, that is the bully instinct at play. Now, I don't know about you, but as far as I'm concerned, this behavior has been completely normalized in our culture.
I don't know, does anybody have experience with that video conference and webinar? Do you think that this is normalized in our culture, and can you give some examples maybe out there?
That'd be
Time
great.
to talk to the audience.
Yeah.
Maybe how and when you've seen bullying and be
great.
normalized in
Yes.
work or school or
Yeah.
life. I'm just really, really engaged.
You're absorbing
I'm
all-
totally absorbing all this information.
It's
and
fascinating, isn't it?
It's totally fascinating.
Yeah.
I've never heard it explained this way before, ever. And it's just
That makes sense.
having a lot of aha moments myself.
I
like.
know.
So, does anybody on video conference want to talk about bullying and how maybe it's been normalized, or how you've seen it normalized in our current culture, whether it be urban or otherwise, rural? Dee Dee Nelson.
I have one. Use it stand-up comics, making fun of audience members.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So, entertainment.
I agree, yeah. For entertainment value, poking fun.
Management being condescending in the workplace, somebody said. Michelle said bullying can be normalized as rites of passage.
Oh, yeah, like hazing and things like
As
that.
hazing
Yeah.
and...
Can I say something about that?
Yeah.
Because, rites of passage were always a very important part of our traditional lifestyle, and in some communities still are. And rites of passage have been confused with the high-risk behavior of youths, normalizing that. High risk rites of passage were about a coming of age, about the development of courage and mixed feelings, and an acknowledgement of a maturation. We have confused rites of passage with high risk behavior and normalized that.
Yeah.
Two different things as far as I'm concerned.
The whole media thing, I don't know if this, I think it's an example where advertising, like showing, especially women, are supposed to look a certain way, which sets up a thing where if you don't meet this standard, you're inferior, and in a way, I think that's bullying by the media.
Sure thing. I agree, because it exploits those who are vulnerable.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And these crazy expectations
Yeah.
of glorified beauty that can't even be done unless it's on computer or
Absolutely, yeah.
or by technology.
On a large scale in terms of mass media and the messages.
Somebody said in the workplace. Somebody said Facebook. Bullying can be through humor.
Oh yes, hostile humor.
Normal and expected part of the role of the older sibling to exploit the younger siblings.
Absolutely.
And there's a confession she definitely did as an older sister. Bullying stemming from leadership in our communities, and then
Absolutely. I want to say something about that because it was last summer actually that there was an older boy that was tormenting a younger boy on my street in front of my house, and I could see the anxiety on the younger boy's face. And how upset he was getting, and the older boy was relentless. And so I, in my usual fashion, I threw my window open and I put my head out the window and I said, "Hey, stop that. He doesn't want you to do that anymore." And the little boy ran away, and the older boy looked up at me and he said, "I can do it. It's my brother."
like this
Yes.
entitlement.
That's right. And I thought, oh my goodness, but if we know what the roots are, we can see that the bully needs help, you see. that he's not being moved to care for. When he sees vulnerability, it's not moving, it's not evoking the caretaking instincts. Now that can't be taught. That child or that person needs to be taken into relationship with someone who can create the conditions for some softening to happen.
Another one is nursing. In the nursing environment, nurses eat their young. Xbox.
I've heard this
apparently
before.
Xbox Online.
Oh yes, where they go all, people are from all over the place are playing, right?
Yeah. It's normalized by not being accountable for your own actions. In society, tenants get it bullied. First Nations children bullying each other in the playground. Teachers also bullying or ignoring the bullying on playgrounds.
Some principals and teachers are bullies, right?
Yeah. Bullying through non-verbal language. Yeah. So you can. It's okay.
I'd like to. I think that the whole educational system is set up for bullying, and the reason I think this is my family moved a lot when I was young, and I was really shy, and I got bullied at almost every school we were in. I was real skinny and shy, and there was one school I attended, and there was no bullying in the school, and there was even a retarded boy in there who was drooling all the time.
Yes. Absolutely. So that's
and the reason.
You're getting feedback.
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh.
Yep, there was interruption.
Oh, do you want me to say it again? I just attended one school when I was a kid. There was bullying in all these other schools, but there was one I attended where I didn't see any bullying, and I only went there for a few months. There was even a retarded boy in the school who was drooling all the time, and everybody in the room treated him with respect. There was none, and what was different about the school, it was an old country school where all the grades were in the same room, and you could go at your own pace. There was no, if you could do 2 grades in 1 year if you wanted, and there wasn't this you're stupid and you're smart, none of that going on, and the teacher was out every recess playing with everyone.
Maybe that's some of the answer.
Yeah, there you go, right? That says so much, and it fits with what I'm talking about here in terms of what is needed, the solution here, the cure.
Yeah, can I make a suggestion too, personally? I'd say within the Army and the armed forces and the military, Navy, it's kind of hazing, and it's normalized.
It's totally normalized. Now, I do want to draw a line between an aggression problem and a bullying problem, because when I do my lateral violence workshop, I talk about aggression, and I also talk about bullying, but they are 2 different things. Often aggression is the result of high levels of frustration and some arrested development in terms of not having developed the necessary internal resources for self-control. And so we can have someone that's erupting all the time, but they're not bullies, do you see? You have to have those 2 things together. The person has to be dominant and defended in order to be a bully, whereas aggression can happen to any of us. Right? We just go over the top, an emotion just gets too big, and we have an eruption. And I think we confuse those things. Is there any other?
I think that covered pretty much a lot of the bases where they see it: high school versus junior high students, senior versus junior, and saying that they can observe this in different areas.
I want to just make sure that I underline the fact that in order for bullying, there does have to be a victim, and that the victims of bullying are often defended as well. And that's why you'll see a child who is bullied in one school, we'll pull them out of that school, we'll send them to another school, they get bullied there. We send them to the next school, they get bullied there. And it's because they can't stay out of harm's way, because they're defended too. Now, they're defended, but they're not dominant. Okay? The other thing is that we can have half bullies. So we can have people that will be moved to, I think Robin Hood, I use him as an example because what did he do? He stole from the rich to give to the poor. So he's like a half bully. He bullied the rich, right? He was moved to assert his dominance there. And so you'll see this in people who, it's very contextual. And so you'll see in one context the bullying dynamic come alive, and then in another context it won't be present there. And that's why when you sit down with the so-called bully to sort it out, it often appears as if there's not a bullying problem. I also wanted to say something about consequences. They don't work with bullies. Often bullies have been consequenced to death, and they're already defended against feelings of caring and responsibility, and so we can consequence them all we like. It's not going to evoke feelings of caring and responsibility. It often will defend them more deeply. Any other questions before I go to the next slide?
They're just comments. Hybert was saying it's very hard to put forward a definite meaning of bullying, but there's different circumstances, and people need a policy in place to correctly interpret for each environment, depending on where they're at. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that sounds very dangerous. Half bullies.
Yeah.
It could be hidden, you know.
Yeah. Well, and we've all seen people that can, you know, they'll bully this person but not this person. Why is that? Right? They'll defer here but not over here. So it is contextual. I wanted to talk a little bit about where to focus energy in terms of bullying problems. The don'ts are don't battle against the bully instinct and the symptom behavior. So trying to control behavior, shape behavior, usually does not solve the problem or change the character of the bully in any way. And do not focus on the arena between people, trying to make them to get along and be nice to each other. Because they will do that in front of the right people. But then behind closed doors, the problem it carries on. And we can't teach this. We can teach people to act nice to each other, but we can't teach people to be actually caring. Where you want to focus your energy is on establishing a caring dominance. And that is important. We want to be able to not only establish a caring dominance for the victim of bullying, that person needs to be taken under the wing of somebody and brought into relationship with someone who's an alpha, who's caring. But the bully also needs to be taken into relationship with someone who's a caring alpha. Mm-hmm. Embed in natural caring hierarchies. So where there isn't a hierarchy, we have named hierarchies, but sometimes we're not fulfilling their roles. And so we need to have some sort of a hierarchy in place. And sometimes we have leaders who are bullies, dare I might say. And sometimes we have leaders who get bullied. Okay? And we need to have strong, alpha, dominant leaders that are caring, and there needs to be a hierarchy. So people need to be placed and traditionally we did this quite intentionally in relationships with each other. And that would de-escalate some of the problems. Bullies need to be collected, and one of the ways we can do that is by playing to the alpha instincts. And so if we are that caring dominant leader and we're trying to establish a relationship with the bully, whether it's a child or an adult, sometimes we need to get underneath the problem to get in there, and sometimes we need to defer a little bit or play to their alpha instincts in terms of giving them the alpha position over something, providing them a place where they can be in charge of something, but trying somehow to make that connection. And ultimately softening the bully's heart, because the bully has got a hard heart and life circumstances have made it that way for them. And that's all I have. I'm done a little bit early today, so maybe we can open up to questions.
Yeah, I think we should open up to questions now. Is there anybody on video conference that has anything to ask Denise at this point? And also webinar, it's time for any questions, so please feel free to go ahead and and bring in your questions. I have one saying, is the copy of the presentation available? And we do record it, so we'll have to go in and edit. It'll eventually be posted on YouTube when we get through our backlog of them.
Okay.
I want to take some time to thank Stephen Prevost, who does all the tech for this, as also Davina Ridley, who's the program assistant, and Catherine Barry, who's the program coordinator, and Leah, who is nice to have introduce you, I guess, come in and meet you because you've been here before.
Yes.
So Leah's our education director.
Yeah. She sat in your seat last time.
Yes.
That's right.
And Michelle Brown is here, and she's wondering, can you recommend a way to deal with cyberbullying?
I think that, like I said, this particular course is at least a 1-day course, if not a 2-day course. But what it endeavors to do is provide insight so that you can, if you understand the root of the problem, you will understand what the resolution is, because you can't control the internet. Mm-hmm. It's way out of hand. It's gone way too far. It's gotten way on us. It is what it is. And so the only resolution is to work with the individuals. And like I said, both the victims of bullying and the bully themselves are defended against vulnerability, which means there's been wounding and hardening that's happened there. And so a person who is got a healthy limbic system and has access to all their vulnerable emotions will be moved to caution and would not find themselves in the position of being cyberbullied. You see, they just wouldn't find themselves in that position. So part of the resolution is to be working to create environments where people can heal.
Yeah, it's a little confusing with the case of Amanda Todd, because there was a man who demanded pictures from her and then posted it everywhere.
Well, the thing about this is that Amanda Todd's dad said, if my daughter had come to me, I would have helped her.
Yeah.
Okay?
So she had put herself in
She was no longer seeking for her needs to be met by her parents.
Yeah.
She was seeking for her needs to be met outside of the context of her relationship with her parents, and so they could no longer throw her a lifeline.
Wow. And protect her.
That's right. If the parents had maintained a connection, an attachment, a working relationship with their daughter, the daughter would have sought help from them, and that probably she wouldn't have taken her life. But because she was marooned, she was seeking everywhere else but her parents. Yeah. And so if you look at it this way, it's not so much what happens, but what doesn't happen in response to what happens. And so the relationship's just not there. And it's like we have to back way up to get right back to basics.
The core.
Yeah.
There's some here. How can we help the victims of bullying? Can you cover or focus bullying in the workplace, within community, and ways to deal with it? Mm-hmm. I guess they want some more direction towards First Nations communities that we're talking to today.
Yeah, well, as I was saying, the victims of bullying are defended, and so that means that there's been some wounding there, and the conditions haven't been right for their heart to soften. And so the question is this, because I never tell people what to do or give instructions, the question I would ask you to consider is, how do you create environments for that healing to take place? How do you place the victims of bullying in a relationship with a caring alpha presence, in a mentoring role, so they feel like they have a lifeline somewhere, so they're not marooned, and they're not seeking empathy from bullies, and they're not placing themselves in situations and circumstances in which bullying can take place? That's the biggest part of the problem. A person who is got a soft heart and is healing will be automatically moved to caution. If I walk into a room and I feel unwelcome, if there's not an invitation in a person's eyes for me, if I can feel that I'm in danger, I skedaddle. And I don't find myself in those situations. In organizations, the leaders have to pick up responsibility. We need to have caring alpha leaders that take the bully into relationship with them, and who also take the victim into relationship with them. And we need to be brought bringing people back into those hierarchical relationships that I was talking about. That is the only resolution, because we can make all the policies we want. We can't control every incident of bullying in our communities or in our organizations. You cannot control a person's tone of voice or rolling of the eyes or the way people reject each other or all the little things that take place. And so it's important to have those policies in place, but that's not ultimately the resolution. And we can have sensitivity training, and we can do, try to do behavior modification plans, but again, it won't soften the hearts. People will learn to act the way that we want them to act, but behind closed doors, they'll carry on.
And one person's asking specifically how you protect yourself from bullies who are in leadership positions when they have system of policies used against us.
If you have leaders who are bullies and you have no lifeline to anywhere, you're not going to like my answer very much, actually, because it's not an easy answer. For me, I would have to ask myself why I'm placing myself in such a situation, whether it's for money or whatever the circumstances are. That is a bigger issue, and you then have to look to chief and council, and if chief and council are in that situation where they're part of the bullying problem, it becomes very difficult. It's like in a school. It's in a school that's trying to stop bullying amongst the children on the playground, yet the principal of the school is a bully. There is no easy answer for that. How do you do that? How do you cause the leader of an organization, of a community, of a school to find some softening and to get their caring instincts back? How do you have a teacher do that? The only resolution is through relationships. Those things that I said and the things that are up here on this slide is establishing a caring dominance, creating natural hierarchies, embedding people in those hierarchies very intentionally, being able to collect the bully. But you do need help. And I feel for people that are stuck in hierarchies where the leaders have lost their caring and their alpha. Mm-hmm. It's tough. I know it's not a probably satisfying answer.
Well, it's about healing the trauma and the melting the heart. So it's like everybody in the community, in some way, who've been in trauma, because it's generational, that you need to actually put that in and implement these kind of healing areas for everyone at all ages and all levels and all levels of leadership and in youth. So it's a holistic.
I will tell you that I run parenting groups for the Squamish Nation, and the softening, it can be, and you can't really put a timeline on it. You can't predict it. You can't command emotion, but create those conditions, which I endeavor to do whenever I do a circle or a program. And I have seen callous parents find their tears and find their soft heart and find their way back to their instincts to be better parents. And it hasn't been me healing them, it's been me just creating those conditions for healing and inviting people so that they can soften. A hardened person can't look at themselves. I can't look at myself when I'm in a hardened place. I just can't reflect from that place.
It's pretty amazing. So you just answered somebody's question about what workshops for parents and students, if you do those.
Yes.
And somebody wants to know more about policy and law. Is there any anti-bullying rules in effect in BC, and your comment towards?
Yeah, and I think every province has some different ones. So you can look on the provincial, site. Also look on, and I think there's something for Ministry of Child and Family Services that has something. But you can also look on the Government of Canada site for the bullying legislation and laws and information. There is a great resource called PrevNet. So Google that, but there's about 90 different researchers that belong to this network that research. They are dedicated to only researching bullying. Wow. Okay, so check that site out as well for some information. I know every province has a different, we have a race bullying here in BC.
But your focus is more on prevention as opposed to, again, the laws that just address the behavior.
I actually think what I love about this information is if you have a bullying program in place or you're thinking about tackling this problem, this will give you the insight to do that in an informed way. As opposed to, I mean, whatever, even if you chose you're trying to choose a bullying program that's out there, this will give you the information you need in order to make an informed choice, an insightful choice, as opposed to just sort of investing in something time-wise and money-wise and sort of going like, well, I hope this works. Let's do a very expensive, time-consuming experiment. At least with this, you're going at it from a very informed place.
Is there any more questions on video conference out there? Questions, comments?
Washington Health is okay.
Thank you. Gispiox, McLeod, Okomalum. Is there anybody else on video conference that has any more questions? We'll be putting on the links, as I said, up on the website after the UBCLC and sending them out to people who registered with their emails. I want to thank you again, Denise, for coming back. And
Thank you.
This is really, really enlightening workshop. I hope we get to do maybe another one even.
Cool. Me too.
And thanks everyone for attending today and making the time for yourself to come here.
Thank you.